I awoke to a strange vampire grinning down at me. The boy was young, perhaps no more than 20 when he died. He was a handsome youth, and not long dead. I could still smell the human blood that coursed through his veins. "Wake up, sleepyhead," he tittered. "My mistress Babette is waiting for you in the car." I ignored his words and sat up, brushing damp hay from my shoulders. The boy backed away, looking me up and down as I climbed to my feet. "Where's Babette? And how is it that you've come to be here?" "I just told you," he said, turning his back on me and heading outside. "She's waiting for you in the car." I followed the youth out, not liking the arrogance of his swagger and even less his dismissive tone. The night was star-shot as I emerged. A full moon sailing overhead. Nearby, a limousine sat, engine idling. A long, sleek, black machine, almost panther-like in the darkness. The youth went to the side door and opened it with a flourish. "Come, Nicholas," Babette's voice floated from within. "We don't have all night." "Yes, Nicholas," the boy said, his grin getting wider. "Please do get in." I ignored him. I climbed inside and sat beside Babette, who even in her filthy dress sat like a queen amongst the soft leather and gold trappings. "I take it he's one of yours," I said, nodding towards the boy who was now climbed into the front seat and started the engine. "Take us home, Sebastian," she said, before pressing a small button, separating the front of the car from the rear with smoky glass, before turning her attention back to me. "Yes, he's one of mine. I found him droll and entertaining once. Now he's my driver." "And how is it he happened to find us here in the arce end of nowhere?" I asked, trying to keep the suspicion from my voice. "I happened to be up with the setting sun," she said, arching an eyebrow. "You seem tired, so I let you sleep on while I had a quick look around. I just so happened to come across a farmhouse. The people inside were kind enough to let me use their phone, so I called Sebastian and had him come pick us up." "Really?" I said, taking in the rosiness of her cheeks. "And where are those people now?" "They're dead," she said in a cold voice, her eyes never leaving mine. "I drained them dry, Nicholas. And I'll have none of your judgment. Do you think it was an easy thing to do, to defeat Bartholomew, then fly us across half an ocean, the sun hot on our heels, already weak from the blood I had bequeathed you? No, my Nicholas, it almost killed me. I had to feed to live. It was them or me. Oh, would you prefer the lives of two mortals over my own?" "You know I would not. You told me many times our moral compass is not the same, and I am far from your keeper." "You keep my heart, Nicholas," she said, her voice softening now. "We are in this together, you and I. For what I did to Bartholomew, Marius will have my head, just as much as your own. We are fugitives together." "For that I am truly sorry, Babette," I said, taking her hand, glad that she did not pull away from me. "It is of no mind. It was I that sought you out and came to your aid. The tyranny of the council must be stopped. Marius must be stopped." "But how?" I asked her, desperate for some kind of answer. "That, my love," she said, turning from me and looking deep into the night, "is a question to which I have no answer." The rest of the journey was spent in silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts until at last we turned down a long gated driveway that opened up to reveal a large mansion surrounded by perfectly manicured lawns. "Welcome to my home," Babette said, turning from the window as we pulled into the driveway. "Where are we?" I asked, taking in the splendor of this place. "Devon," she replied. "This is Jenner's Folly. It once belonged to my husband. After his passing, it became mine." "Your husband?" I gaped at her. "You were married to a mortal?" "Yes, as a matter of fact I was. A very wealthy one." And he knew what you were. Of course, she said, taking my hand and leading me towards the house. He was none too pure himself, dashing, charismatic and handsome, but not too pure. In fact, he was a criminal mastermind and the head of a rather large criminal enterprise. My nocturnal activities bothered him not at all. In fact, he had quite a few enemies that he was happy to be rid of. I burst out laughing then. I simply couldn't help myself. You were a hitman, a killer for the mob. She looked startled then, but soon began to laugh herself. I never thought of it quite like that, she said, opening the door and stepping inside. It was more of a case of mutually satisfying arrangement. She stopped, suddenly noticing that I was no longer beside her, before turning and grinning at me slyly. Ah, I forgot you can't come in without my invitation. But the smile fell from her face when she saw my forlorn expression. What is it, Nicholas? Do you think I would leave you outside to rot? By all means, do come in. But I hesitated in the doorway. There is always something, isn't there, Babette? Something that reminds us that we are not human. Gently, she took my arm and pulled me into her embrace. You've lost much, my love. Your family was all that anchored you to your mortal self. With their death, I fear you feel the long years of your immortality pushing down upon you. Come, she said, guiding me into a nearby room where a roaring fire glowed in the hearth. Sit down. I have something for you. She was gone for some time before returning where I dozed by the soft fire's glow. With her was a beautiful girl, or at least she would have been, if not for the scar that ran across her face, from her right eye across the bridge of her nose before petering out on her left cheek. This is Angela. She was a homeless waif when I took her in. Now we have an arrangement. She provides me with a little blood now and again, and I give her a home. Another mutually beneficial arrangement, I asked, sitting up straighter. She shrugged. It is what it is, and you need to feed, Nicholas. Although, you will find with Bartholomew's blood in you, not so much as you once did. Oh, and Angela, she said, turning to leave. He is mine. He only needs your blood and nothing more. Yes, Babette, the girl smiled. Of course. After Babette was gone, the girl slinked over to me, all swaying hips. Her dark eyes held sensual promise. My, she whispered, sliding onto my knee. You are quite the handsome one. You make Sebastian look positively plain. What do you know of him? I asked, stroking her fine silk hair. She shivered at my touch, her breath coming a little faster. Not much. He was here when I first came into this place, when I was no more than a child. He was still Babette's plaything then, before he fell out of favor. And why did he fall out of favor? This, for a start, she said, tracing one delicate finger down her scarred face. I was nearly 20 by then, and had finally found my way into Babette's bed after many years of trying, she giggled. But Sebastian became jealous and attacked me, giving me this. After that, neither of us saw her bed again, and Sebastian was demoted to General Dog's Body and I, she said, snuggling closer. A gift for guests. You must hate him very much for what he's done to you, I said, brushing the hair from her pulsing throat. At first, yes. But our banishment from the great lady's bedroom actually served to draw us closer together. Now there's peace between us. Perhaps even fondness. But I was no longer listening. All I could see was the deep throbbing pulse of her throat and the rich smell of her flesh. So young, so full of life. Gently, I bit into her. As soon as her blood hit my mouth, I knew I was lost. A great hunger swelled within me, I crushed her in my embrace, drinking her up, swallowing her life in huge, thirsty gulps, but suddenly she was gone, and Sebastian's snarling face was before me. In his hand he held an iron poker, grabbing up from the fireplace, which he now sent sailing towards my heart. With a cry, I pistoned my leg forward, catching him hard in the chest. He flew backwards, crashing to a large oak desk and onto the wall with bone-shattering force. I thought that would be the end of it, but instantly he was back on his feet, and I realized he and Babette shared more with this youngling than just her bed. He smiled at me, then, as if perhaps reading something of my thoughts. "Oh yes, Nicholas," he laughed. "I have tasted the blood of the goddess. She's made me strong. You nearly killed our beloved Angela, and for that, I'll have your head." That said, he charged a blur of motion, but I had tasted the blood of Bartholomew, and to me, his movements were nothing more than that of a clumsy child. As he came on, I simply stood aside, grabbing up his slashing arm and using his own wild momentum against him. I threw him screaming into the roaring fire. Suddenly, Babette was amongst us, snarling and cursing, as Sebastian flung himself free from the fire's burning embrace. As his clothes and hair a raging inferno, howling in pain, he rolled back and forth across the deep carpeted floor, extinguishing the lapping flames. "Enough!" Babette screeched, shoving me hard in the chest, meaning to thrust me back into the chair, but her eyes widened in surprise when she realized she could not budge me. Cursing, she turned to Sebastian, who lay dazed upon the floor, his burnt flesh already beginning to knit and heal. "God curse you!" she shrieked at him, grabbing him by the back of the neck and dragging him across the room. "If it wasn't for these damn little killings, I would banish you from my house forever. But you will pay for this, Sebastian. Oh, you will pay." I followed on a little ways behind, feeling somewhat guilty now. "Babette," I tried to speak to her. "It was my fault. He was only trying to defend the girl. My hunger got the better of me." "Nonsense!" she hissed at me, her face feral. "He doesn't give a tinker's fuck for the girl, or anyone else. He wanted you out of the way is all. Do you know how many times he's nearly killed her himself?" She slammed open a wooden door that led down to the basement. "I was a fool to give him the dark kiss, but I was mourning my husband at the time, and he damn well knew it. Didn't you?" she said, shaking him roughly. "Well, I have had enough of your games and your arrogance. I am mistress here, and now you will be punished." "No, mistress!" Sebastian screamed as he saw the metal coffin before him. "Please, mistress, not that, anything but that!" Suddenly, she released him, and he staggered away, never taking his eyes from her face. "Get in," she commanded. "Get in now, or it ends for you right here and now. I created you, and I can end you." Sebastian looked at me, as if seeking help, but looked away, knowing better than to cross Babette when her temper was up. It didn't happen often, but when it did, it was best to stand clear until she settled back down. "Now, Sebastian!" she screamed, reaching for him. But he quickly stepped out of the way, throwing himself inside the waiting box. Without a moment's hesitation, she slammed the lid closed on his slumped-over form before donning a pair of heavy work gloves and wrapping the whole thing in silver chains. "Babette," I tried again. "Be still, Lord Raddock." She turned to me. "If the girl dies, I will be wrathful with you. Now get yourself to your room. The sun will be upon us soon. There are many rooms on the second floor. Find one, stay in it. I don't even want to look at you until tomorrow night." With a sigh, I slinked away, noting much to my relief that Angela's heart was still beating strong as I passed her form, not quite daring to interfere with her. I headed upstairs, and there I found a large room with rich furnishings and heavy drapes. Slowly I ripped off my clothes and climbed into a large bed before falling into a deep sleep. I dreamed of glowing red eyes, Marius's red eyes, searching for us through an eternity of endless nights. I awoke with the setting sun, finding fresh clothes laid out neatly at the bottom of my bed. There was also a crystal decanter and a single glass laid out on the bedside table. I reached for it, savoring the rich, coppery aroma of Babette's blood, knowing this was a kind of peace offering between us. Grateful, I swallowed it down, making sure not to leave a single drop, so as not to imply an insult. After I finished, I quickly got dressed into an expensive black suit and burgundy tie before heading downstairs. I found Babette in the library, sat on a rich leather sofa, the girl Angela by her side. As I entered, I noticed how pale she looked at the crackling firelight, and how she winced at my approach. Scared of me now. With a sigh, I sat in a high-backed chair opposite the duo. "Angela," I said in a low voice, "you must forgive me. I never meant to hurt you. I'm going through some changes." "I've explained all," Babette interrupted smoothly, "and Angela forgives you. Don't you, my love?" "Of course," the girl smiled, but that smile never quite reached her eyes, and it hurt my heart to see it. "You have my thanks, Angela," I smiled back at her, "and my word, it shall never happen again." "Good," Babette smiled. "Now we are all friends again." "What of Sebastian?" the girl asked. "What of him?" Babette smiled at her dangerously. The girl swallowed hard, but continued. "Forgive me, mistress, but how long must he stay locked down there?" "Until I decide he has learned his lesson, but Sebastian is a slow learner, and so I'm afraid it may take some time." "Now run along and play. Nicholas and I have much to discuss." The girl knew she was treading on dangerous ground, and so quickly did as she was bid, virtually skittering from the room. "How did you sleep, Nicholas?" She smiled at me. "I had bad dreams." She waved them away. "Don't we all?" "We must talk, Nicholas." "Yes, Babette. Among all that chaos last night, I heard you mention something about a series of killings. What did you mean by that?" "I was just coming to it," she retorted hotly. "If you would ever let me finish a damnable sentence." "Forgive me, great lady." I stood, bowing like a quarter. "Oh, do sit down. You're impossible to stay mad at." "That's why you love me," I grinned, wiggling my eyebrows at her seductively. It did my heart good to see that I could still make her blush like a milkmaid. "Stop that," she chuckled, slapping me on the knee playfully. "We must talk. I need your help, Nicholas. There's something going on that puts my life here in danger." "You mean other than Marius?" "We will deal with Marius when the time comes, but for now, I don't intend to just sit around here waiting for him to make his appearance." I suddenly realized she was scared. Whatever business this was, she was using it to take her mind from the inevitable fight ahead. "There's a small town not far from here, by the name of Hansberry. For over a month now, people have turned up missing or dead, their throats torn open. The local newspaper has started to call them the vampire murders. I've done everything in my considerable power to keep it out of the mainstream press. I've called in 100 favors, made 1,000 bribes, and even threatened the penalty of death to conceal this outrage, but that can only last so long. Something must be done, and quickly." "What do you think it is? A rogue vampire?" "That would be my guess. Or a blood-crazed revenant like your poor, misbegotten son." "That could explain it," I said, sitting back, my mind racing. "But that wouldn't explain the missing people. A blood fiend like my son would not steal people away, he would simply have torn them to pieces. So where does that leave us?" "That's why we're going to town, Nicholas. To see Crazy Maureen. Grab your coat, my love. We're going on a little adventure." We walked through the night, down narrow tree-laden country lanes, the moon full and bright. "So, are you going to tell me who this Maureen is, or are we going to play 20 questions? "She's a drunk," she replied, taking my arm. "A drunk and a powerful psychic." "A drunken psychic. That sounds helpful." "Don't mock her, Nicholas," she rounded on me. "She has a great power. She drinks only to numb her heightened senses. Her gift has made her a pariah amongst her own kind. She lives in a small cottage on the outskirts of town. I help her out from time to time. Now it's her turn to help us." I pulled her up short. Babette, does she know what you are? What we are? Yes, she replied, her eyes silver in the moonlight. She knows. Could all this be something to do with her? She laughed then. Oh no, Nicholas, not her. You will understand when you see her. 30 minutes later, we stood outside of a small thatched roof cottage, all white paint and lead-lined windows. Babette raised her hand to knock, but the door was pulled open before the blow landed. A woman stood in the doorway. She could have been anywhere from 40 to 60. Her hair was black and streaked with gray, and she wore dark glasses that covered much of her face. Babette, she whispered, pulling her scruffy-looking cardigan tighter around her, as if to ward off a chill. I've been expecting you. Please do come in, she said, stepping to one side. I'm afraid my friend here will need an invite, Babette said, nodding towards me. The woman did not track her movement, and I suddenly realized she was blind. Come in then, Nicholas Radek. You know of me, I said, startled. Some of us do not need eyes to see, she replied, as we slid past her and into a homely-looking kitchen. Please, sit, she said, shuffling in behind us. We did as she asked, waiting until she was more comfortably seated, a slight way across from us. What do you require of me, Babette? I need your help. I know it pains you to use your gift, but people are dying. You mean the vampire killings? Yes, Babette continued. I need to find this creature and kill it before its bloodthirsty nature leads the authorities to my door. Will you help me? Of course, she said more softly. I owe you everything. Even the very roof over my head is down to you. Now give me your hand, and we shall see what we shall see. Babette reached for her, and as soon as their hands met, the woman called Maureen spasmed and convulsed, her eyes rolling back in her head. Jealousy! She shrieked. Jealousy and hate drives their master. Legion, for they are many in the cold blackness. They crave in the stone prison, deep in the earth, the sound of the ocean roars around the dead man's curve. Babette pulled her hand free, and the other woman slumped down, seemingly exhausted. Dead Man's Curve, Babette gaped at me. I know that place. It's on the coast, not far from here, but there's no cave there, only an old tin mine. That's it, then. Whoever's doing these things must be hiding there, I said, leaping to my feet. Can you find this place? Oh, yes, she grinned. The night is still young, Nicholas. Shall we go pay them a visit? What of her? I said, pointing to the seemingly sleeping woman. She will be fine. A slight headache in the morning, nothing more, she said, heading for the door. I hurried after her, my arm brushing past the sleeping woman who jerked upright, seizing my arm in a frenzied death grip of froth pouring from her lips. Hail, Nicholas Radek, keeper of the family that is no more. Your path ends where his did begin. Look for your foe in the dead forest at the edge of the sea. There your fate will be decided. That said, she slumped back down, unconscious. Nicholas! Babette called from outside. Are you coming or no? Yes. I stalked out into the darkness. Babette. She spoke to me. I heard it, Nicholas. We will speak more of that later, but for now, one thing at a time. I think she spoke of Marius. Nicholas! She turned to me, her eyes flashing. Marius is not here, not yet. The problem of mine is right before us. Please, she implored. Please, let's not speak of Marius now. Very well, my love, I said, drawing her onto my embrace. We shall not speak of him now. Good, she smiled up at me. Let's go. We shot up into the night. Time for you to sink or swim, my love, she said, as we soared over the rugged coastline, and just like that, she dropped me. With a cry, I plummeted towards the earth, cartwheeling out of control. Use your will! Her voice boomed in my mind. Will it, and it will be so! Even in the depths of my terror, I knew she spoke the truth, and I brought myself my will to bear and stopped my dizzying descent and just sat there, floating on a current of air. "Up," I commanded, concentrating on Babette, who soared high above me, and then I was beside her, soaring, laughing, as the cold wind buffeted me to and fro. "Well, look at you. No cape or anything," she tittered. "How did you know I could do it?" I asked her, our fingers entwining. "You have my blood coursing through your veins, and the blood of Bartholomew. You are more powerful than you can ever begin to comprehend. Now come, let us find this transgressor, and put paid to him once and for all." 10 minutes later, we were stood outside the old abandoned mine shaft that rose high upon the cliffs of a rocky outcrop named Dead Man's Curve. There was fresh blood spattered on the walls, close to an iron mine cap that had been torn from its moorings. "I think this is the place," I said, trying to peer into the gloom, the sound of the ocean crashing in my ears. "You don't say," Babette said somewhat haughtily. "Please do come in," a voice echoed to us out of the darkness. "We have been expecting you." Babette's eyes widened in shock. "It can't be," she growled, stalking inside. I followed, hot on her heel. For a moment we were in a narrow tunnel, the faint glow of flickering firelight up ahead. The tunnel opened into a vaulted chamber. Sat upon the floor by a small campfire that cast shadows around the room was Sebastian, a dead child in his arms. At our approach he stood, the dead body falling to the floor like a broken doll. "Welcome!" He smiled at us through bloody teeth. "How are you here?" Babette grated, her entire body vibrating with rage. "I locked you away!" "And I let him out." A musical voice drifted out of the darkness as Angela stepped into the firelight, her eyes crimson orbs, her mouth stained with blood. "Oh, Angela," Babette shook her head sadly. "What has he done to you?" "What you never would," the girl spat at him. "How many nights did I beg you, implore you to give me the blood kiss so I could be with you forever? But you denied me. You were happy to watch me grow old and die. But Sebastian promised me eternal life if I would help him." "Help him do what?" I said, standing by Babette's side. "Build an army," Sebastian laughed. "We hide in the shadows when we should be the rulers of this world. Behold," he said, throwing up his arms, "my children!" And just then, as if hearing some unknown summons, a whole multitude of vampires came sleeking out of the darkness, but they were horribly mutated, some impossibly thin, scabrous, others twisted and malformed. "Revenants," Babette gasped. "Blood berserkers." "Not anymore," Sebastian laughed. "Oh, they were a little unruly at first, but I soon realized my blood was too weak to make more of our kind. Only these things. So I fooled you into giving me yours. And now they obey my every command. I will kill you for this," Babette grated, stalking towards him. "Oh, I don't think so," Sebastian said, signaling the horde. Just then the top of the cave exploded in a shower of rocks and dust as Marius made his grand entrance. "Not interrupting, am I?" he grinned, flicking the dust from his immaculately tailored suit. "I need a word with you, Lord Radek." He glared at me with crimson eyes. "Well, well, well," Sebastian grinned, stalking towards him. "What do we have here? A new player in town." Marius looked him up and down. With a bored sigh, casually tore his head free from his shoulders in a shower of blood, bone, and gristle. "No!" Angela screamed, but soon was silenced as the vampire horde, now free from any restraint, reverted back to its crazed, bloodthirsty nature. "His death was fast compared to what I am going to do to you, Nicholas Radek." Marius grinned. "And Babette," he said, nodding his head sadly, "your betrayal hurts me the most. Do you remember the fun we used to have together, you, I, and Bartholomew. All those blood-soaked nights. Oh, the things we used to do to your body. We will have those times again." He licked his lips seductively. "Only this time, you will find no pleasure in it. I guarantee that." "It was never a pleasure," Babette hissed at him, quickly backing away. "I would rather die than suffer your embrace again." "Oh, you will," he grinned at her, "but at my choosing, not yours." "You will not touch her," I said, standing before her. He was just about to answer when one of the blood-crazed creatures leapt upon his back, its teeth sinking into his shoulder. He screamed and cast it away, but now the entire horde descended upon him, driving him under the combined weight. "Come," Babette grabbed me by the arm. "This won't hold him for long." "We should attack him now while he's down," I yelled at her face. "Not here. Remember Maureen's words, in the dead forest." "I don't know what that means." "But I do," she yelled. Taking my arm, she flung me outside and caught me up in her embrace, flying us upwards into the night sky, the wind buffeting us as we headed north. "Where are we going?" I asked, breaking free of her and gliding by her side as we sped onwards. "To Lulworth Cave," she replied, her hair rippling in the cold night wind. "Why there?" I asked, trying hard to keep up. "The dead forest can only mean one place. The Jurassic Forest. It's a stretch of coast near Lulworth, in Dorset. The coastline is dotted with petrified remains of long-dead forests. Remember the story I told you of Marius' creation? The forest in the cave by the ocean. The old well, home to the old demon in the ground." "Your path ends where his did begin." I repeated the words of the old prophet. "But how can you know this is the right place?" "You forget I've tasted the blood of Marius. When he made me a council member, even a single drop increased my power 100-fold. "The blood memories. You saw it through the blood memories." "Yes." Her voice almost stolen by the growing wind. "And we have visited the area before on our many travels together as a council. Many times Marius hinted that this was the place of his creation, and in that mocking tone of his. "Still, it's a long shot," I screamed over the freezing wind. She shrugged. "Looks like that's all we have. It's as good a place to make our final stand." Moments later we were heading down, landing on the abandoned coast. A small village alight in the distance. "This is it," she said, as I looked around in wonder at the petrified tree stumps and broken logs. "The Jurassic Coast, also known as the Dead Forest." Babette sighed. Just then Marius crash-landed right beside us, striking Babette with a glancing blow, sending her flying through the air and crashing far out into the ocean. Before I could even turn, he grabbed me by the back of the neck in a crushing embrace. "Curious, are you?" he growled at me. "Come then, I'll show you the beginning of my creation, before I end your miserable life." He was running now, the sea and rocks a blur as he sped on, holding me at an arm's length as if I weighed nothing, paralyzed in his terrible, crushing embrace. At last we came to a screeching halt. There he struck the side of the rearing cliff, causing a huge landslide, revealing a narrow cave entrance beneath the centuries of dirt and clay. With terrifying force, he thrust me through the narrow entrance. I howled in pain as the jagged stone tore at my flesh. Marius followed me through the stone crumbling before him. He cast me away, sending me rolling down the sloping floor until my head connected hard against the moss-covered stone. I stood, my vampire eyes adjusting to the darkness. I was standing in a vast cavern, covered in strange lichen that emitted a sickly yellow glow. Behind me was a vast well-like opening, surrounded with decaying stone, and I remember the story of the great worm-like creature that had bequeathed its tainted blood onto Marius. The last hateful act of a dying god the world had long since abandoned. "How do you like it, Nicholas?" Marius mocked. "The birthplace of our kind. I do you a great honor by killing you here." "Did you feel honored?" I growled at him. "When the parasite stole your innocence, violating you, polluting your very essence with its vileness." He moved then, a blur of motion smashing me hard across the face, sending me crashing into the cavern walls with bone-breaking force. Instantly, my body began to knit and heal as I leapt to my feet. Marius's eyes narrowed. I see Bartholomew's blood has made you stronger, but it won't be enough, Nicholas. Not by half. I charged him then, hoping to take him by surprise, but he didn't move as I leapt upon him, trying to sink my fangs into his neck. But I couldn't so much as pierce the skin. It was like trying to bite into marble. Laughing, he grabbed me by my throat and slammed me back down, breaking my spine, crushing the back of my skull as he placed a booted foot upon my chest, pinning me in place. I could kill you now, but I will break your spirit first, and only when you kneel before me and beg for death will I end your suffering. Fuck you! I spat my blood into his face. With a cry of outrage, he began to beat me. After many hours, and all manner of outrage inflicted upon my battered body, he would command me to kneel. But I would not, and so it would begin again. How long this lasted, I could not say. Hours, days. How do you measure time in your own personal hell? I only knew that Marius himself was becoming exhausted, his great strength starting to wane. As he placed his foot upon my head, I whimpered, feeling my skull starting to creak. Kneel before me, he shrieked. Why do you defy me? Why won't you surrender? You killed my family, I gasped. For a moment the pressure increased, and then he staggered away screaming, tearing at the walls, hammering his fist into the stone until the ceiling began to shake, and I feared we would both be buried alive in this terrible place. He turned to me then, and I was shocked to see tears standing out in his eyes. Your family, he sighed. As I propped myself up against the stone wall, my body beginning to heal. Your God-cursed family! He sat down heavily, his head hanging between his knees. He stayed like that for some time. The only sound the muted crash of the ocean and the sighing of the wind. I wasn't always this way, Nicholas. He spoke at first, his voice filled with sorrow. At one point, I was much like you. I had a family of my own. I stayed with them for a while, for centuries. I watched over them, the descendants of my little tribe. I watched them as they grew old, withered, died. I thought I would go mad with heartbreak and grief. And so I turned away from them only to take lovers, make friends who all turned to dust, or begged me for the dark kiss, thinking it's a great gift instead of a great curse, of which it really is. I wandered for centuries, making my home in great cities only to see them burned to the ground, their people put to the sword. I watched on in horror as the humans slaughtered millions, in the name of their god, or for money, land, power, until at last, my heart broken with the pain of it all, I walked into the sun. I burned my flesh, over and over again, only for me to rise again the next night like some terrible phoenix from my own ashes. I threw myself from the tallest buildings, only to have my flesh and bones heal in an instant. I tried everything imaginable to end my suffering, and still I would not die. I knew then the only way to go on was to harden my heart against the world and everything in it, and so I became the monster that you now see before you. And then you came along, Radek. You with your endless love for your children, even for your insane son. Willing to suffer for them, to die for them, always fighting, never surrendering. Your devotion to them. You made me feel again, Nicholas. And I hated you for it. I thought if I destroyed everything you love, you would turn into the soulless monster I'd become. But you did not. You would not. And so, Nicholas, you have defeated me without even drawing your sword. What will you do now? I asked, fearing him yet pitying him at the same time. I will end it once and for all. How? I asked, climbing to my feet. You said yourself you cannot die. Oh, but I can, he said, dragging an ancient-looking dagger from under the back of his jacket and looking at it fondly. I came back to this place some few hundred years ago. Perhaps I was feeling nostalgic, maybe just a little bored. I found this here, he said, placing the blade upon the side of the well. Exactly where I left it over a millennia ago. Can you imagine my surprise when I scooped it up and it did this? He said, drawing the blade across the palm of his hand. Instantly the skin split open and his blood began to flow. Do you know how long it's been since I saw my own blood? Why? Why does it not heal? I do not know, he said, gently pulling away. Perhaps it's because this blade is the last thing that tasted my mortal flesh. Perhaps it's a reprieve from God, or perhaps even the devil himself. If you have had it all this time, then why haven't I ended it? He shook his head softly. Because by the time I found it again, my heart had already turned to stone. But you've made it bleed again. And that I cannot stand, he said, grabbing my shaking wrist and raising the blade towards his throat. And so, you may have your vengeance, Nicholas. But there is price to vengeance. Lord Radok. What price? I whispered into his face. The king is dead. He laughed at me. Long live the king. And that said, he dragged me forward, burying the blade on his throat. Cold blood sprang across my face. I opened my mouth to scream and tried to pull away, but he held me fast. His blood pouring down my throat, pushing up my nose, blinding my eyes, soaking into every pore like some terrible osmosis. At last he fell away. His body, a wasted husk. What have you done? I whispered, feeling a terrible power flow through my veins. Oh, Marius. What have you done to me? Heavy is the head that wears the crown, Nicholas, he gasped. Share this gift with your Babette. Form another council. Do better, Nicholas. Do better than I did. Now end this. I hope God forgives you, I said, placing the blade over his heart. What God? He smiled warily. I nodded, and thrust the blade into his chest, piercing his diseased heart. And just like that, Marius, our creator and the first of our kind, was no more than dust on the wind. Nicholas! Here's Babette. You must forgive me, she wept, slowly emerging from the shadows. I heard your screams, but my courage failed me. I should have come to your aid. And then what? I said, taking her in my arms and pulling her close. You would have only died, and that I could not stand. I said, kissing her tears away. What happened? She said, gently touching my face, fingers lingering. Where is Marius? Gone, my love, I said, gently pushing her away as I drew the blade across my hand, the blood beginning to flow. I offered it to her. "What is this?" she said, looking at my blood hungrily. "A new beginning," I whispered, as she latched onto me. "I shall have a new family now." "Who?" She looked up at me, her beautiful face smeared with my blood. "You," I smiled down at her. "You and all of vampire kind." Outside, the sun began to rise. But I was no longer afraid. In fact, for the first time in a long, long life, I was grateful for the coming of a new dawn.
Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I wanted to tell you thanks so much for watching tonight's video or listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. For those of you that are watching on YouTube, if you could do me a quick little favor, hit that little thumbs up, since there's no longer a thumbs down, and go ahead and hit that subscribe button and hit the bell, because we're required to say that now, by law. If you guys are listening on the podcast, then I don't exactly know how those work. But I think there's a follow button or a subscribe button or something like that to hit. And as always, I want to give a big thank you to all of my contributors on Patreon. You guys are the real MVP. You guys keep the lights on here and allow me to do a whole bunch of cool things like exclusive stories that we're getting a lot more of now, honestly. So thank you guys so much for being a part of that. And a very special thank you to all of the big skeleton patrons, such as Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Brian Arce, Bobby Karman, Stephanie Butler, Tristain Pelton, Chance Burnett, Diana Kraus, Mask Note, Rashad Collins, Joshua Mullen, Zavium, Dan Pham, Matthew McNeese, Shelly J, Ben Spates, Anna Storm, Jeremy H, Raltizal, Nana, The Morgan, Diamondella, MeltedLake, Tully Sue, William King, Reaper 61167, Darth Miver, Micah Ortiz, Satanic Aries, Isoda Hatred, Nessie, Parafa Panda, Bardo Hawk 764, Melancholy Corpse, Ferb, Lambda M98, Harley, Billy Morrow, Sashi Suzaku, at Grizzly Olsen Pro, Caden the Spooky Boy, Zane Nightshade, My Body Sounds Like Rice Krispies, Lord of the Weebs, Jay, Miss Exandra, Suji Campbell, Stricken, Azarine Fox, Fried Chicken 12, Freddy Krueger, Michael Scarborough, Happy Birthday Jason Wilson, Infernal One, Lisa Cottrell, Caspian, Jordan Nels, Hades' Nephew, Tater Chip, Acid System, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Cryptic Nightmares, Kiri the Sloth, Tommy Green, Fester Lampshade, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, Trace Miles, and Corey Kenshin. Thank you guys so much for being a part of Patreon, and for everybody who's down there in the description, and everybody who even contributes just $1 to patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. And, as always, my friends, sweet dreams.